Clap one on three. 1, 2, 3. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're so glad that you're here. As always, I am your host, Lauren Ash, and as always, I am joined by my co-hostess with the most S, Christy Oxborrow. How you feeling?
Well, now that Halloween's over, I'm great.
Everything's cool and everything's smooth.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
needed to get over that hurdle of
I
that
had this.
season.
Yeah, listen, you were putting in a lot of extra hours.
It was too much.
Yeah, full-time
Like
job.
it was what had I done? There was so many moments where I was like, this can't be my life anymore. I can't think of it.
Right.
And now I have to take one of those very costumes that I slaved over. He'd like to keep it, but he wants me to cut the front of it off so we can hang it on the wall like an art piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's doable. But of course, after wearing it for a day at school, there's places I'm going to have to do the touch up on the paint and I'm not ready yet, but I also want to get it done so I never have to think about that again. But I'm glad it's over.
Yeah.
It it destroyed me to a level I can't fully think about.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
listen, if you want to follow Christy along every step of that way, go over to patreon.com, where our one of our bonus episodes this month is a interview, or not interview, a vlog of her creating these costumes.
Oh,
I also want to listen, it came up organically. I'm just going to mention it. If
sure.
you are considering joining our Patreon, fun fact and tip, go to your browser on your web browser, your browser on your web browser. Do it on the internet. Don't use the Patreon app to sign up.
Sure.
There's a little company, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's named after a fruit. Types of this fruit include Granny Smith. Anyway, they're implementing a new system in which they are putting fees that are going to
Mm,
affect you, the consumer. And I hate that. So if you sign up on the web, this is also the thing that's so wild. If you sign up on the web, our prices aren't going to change. If you sign up on the app, you're going to have to give extra money to Apple. And to be clear, we don't get that money. It's
no.
not the pricing is not our choice. None of this is our choice. But just wanted to give that quick little disclaimer there because we want to save you money.
Oh,
We don't want to, like, damn the man.
oh, 100%.
I probably shouldn't be saying this, or maybe this episode's going to get pulled from Apple Podcasts. I love that at first I tried to hide the name of the company and then just
Mhm.
outwardly said it. I'm all over the place.
Oh, I was gonna chime in with something, and then every time I mention it, called it a different fruit,
Oh, that's cute.
just to like, what fruit are we talking about?
Right.
But I think everybody knows.
Yeah. And if you don't use those products, this doesn't apply to you either, then don't worry about it. But again, that's just wanted to get that out there while I still remember and because it came up
Of course.
organically.
Huh,
Um but listen, it's Halloween costumes are out of the way.
they
I
are.
will be honest with you. I had a moment earlier, and by earlier I mean 2 minutes before we started this record.
Mm,
I was like, "Oh, Halloween's out of the way."
yeah,
We have a Love Actually cosplay coming up now, and I have not put any thought into who I'm doing, what it
yeah.
is, none of it. Have you thought about it?
Um, as soon as I did, like, the very last stitch on that fucking bear hat, which I can't even think about, as soon as I did that, I was like, "Okay. Okay, I think I'm okay." Because I mean, I'd been voice noting you that day, so you could hear my mental decline
Yeah.
as the day went on. And I finished it and I was like, that's it. Oh my God, thank God. And then my brain immediately went, we're doing another cosplay in December. And I almost threw up. Like I was like, I can't think about a costume. So when it comes to that time, I will probably choose what I think is the easiest, least effort level.
Yeah.
Because I can't,
You're not paper
yeah,
macheing ahead this year is what I'm
I'm
hearing.
not. I'm
Yeah,
not.
and I
No.
respect that deeply.
Yeah, I think, well, because I've said for years, December, not unlike Santa Claus, December is my busiest month. And
Of
I
course.
just I need to pull back the reins on that and not go into like a mental physical spiral every time it's December because I take on way too much. So I'm like I need to pull back in December. So I think I'm like, yeah, maybe not paper mache this time around. Maybe find other things that you can do.
Right.
Yeah. I say December, November, December are my busiest month
Sure.
because there's a child's birthday party that I deal with and then we
It
get
just
into the
rolls right
holiday.
into it.
It does because as soon as Halloween is there, then I'm like, well, son of a bitch. I've only got so many weeks to figure out birthday party, booking the place, what are we doing, all of these things. Then there's like his gifts. Then there's also I hand make decorations that they because they usually are in the kitchen before I am in the morning so that they get up and they see that and they have like a happy birthday. That's the first thing they see. And then as soon as that's done, it's like, well, I better really kick it into gear over Christmas. And I'm like, we gotta dial back. So no paper mache.
No.
I've really gotta stop that. But
And
yeah, and I gotta
when
make Christmas ornaments.
when you said kick it, all I heard is kick it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find that lately I've really been preferring to speak in music quotes.
Mm.
Like it gives me joy. Anything that will lead me mentally into a song so I can just like bow out of whatever conversation I'm having and just mentally continue on with
Mm. Mm-hmm.
that's nice. Again, I think I think the costume building broke me on a level that I don't know when I'm coming back, but we'll see.
Well,
We'll
when you
see.
say things like, I think about something that allows me to bow out of, I guess I'll fill in the blank of reality. That's what
Oh
I
yeah.
believe the experts call dissociating. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
listen, sometimes
yeah.
it's only when it gets to certain levels that it becomes an issue. I mean, some people just do it to survive, you know?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that there's never it never feels like there's any break in there
Hmm.
where you're like, okay, here we go. This is done. And then as soon as it's done, I'm like, now I gotta move on to the next thing. And I'm like, or take a beat. But I'm like, no, couldn't couldn't do that. Like today I had to make sure I set an alarm so I could get up, take one of my children to the mall to buy shoes that he needs for tomorrow and then get home by a certain time because I had a hockey game on. But then Sportsnet Plus, and I'll say it, fuckers. That fuckers was to Sportnet Plus, not
Thank you.
anybody else. Um, the game just was black. Like it got about a period in, and then it just stopped showing anything. It stopped showing any game. Like we went through and like checked. I don't know what the deal was, and they don't have a way of like, hey, I'd like to find out what the problem is.
Right.
We sent an email because that was like the only way we could like chat with them to be like, there's a problem. And they were like, hey, we understand you want to talk to us. We'll let you know when we're available. And I'm still waiting. And
See
it's
you
like, I
never.
just, yes. And I was like, oh, this isn't what I need. And it's just, I was looking for a break today and I don't think that's coming.
Yeah, listen, I think anytime you're looking for a break,
Yeah. Oh,
you
by then
know,
it's too late. I should have had the break because I'm on the edge.
there it is.
Yeah. That's where I'm at.
Well,
You're right.
if yeah, you kind of have to set the boundary. Like you have to say, I'm taking
Yeah.
the break. I need the
Yeah.
break. I'm taking the break.
Oh
If
yeah. I
if
have
you're
to
hoping,
implement breaks.
yeah, because if you're
Yeah.
hoping one will come to you, I think you might be waiting for some time.
Oh yeah. If I hope for it, never gonna happen.
Uh,
Never.
never gonna happen. I need to tell you, because as we've already been talking about, and I've talked about on this show so many times, my thoughts are in song lyrics. So anytime somebody
Yeah.
says anything, it triggers a song lyric, as we know. Um, I was at the Best Friends Animal Society super adoption event today in Los Angeles, and well, technically Pasadena, beautiful Pasadena. Um, and I was introduced to a dog, And they said, this dog's name is Shadow. And with the confidence of a million mediocre white men, I
Mhm.
literally at the top of my lungs started going, shush, 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 shush. And at that point went, shallow, realizing it wasn't shadow. The lyric is shallow, not shadow,
Yeah.
shallow. Um,
Mm.
and then couldn't back out of it. Like, I just then decided to just crumple. You know what I mean?
Of
Like, I was
course.
just like,
Of
I'm just gonna
course.
pretend that didn't happen. And I don't really know these people. And
Of course.
I mean, I knew some of the people, but you know what I'm saying. I was just like, yeah, that's the first time that's ever happened to me though, where I've had a lyric trigger that isn't a match,
Isn't the right
and
one.
I didn't know how to
Yeah.
handle that.
I get that. I would nail it if the dog's name was Arms Wide Open.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
But
Absolutely.
the odds of that are
Yeah,
pretty
the
low.
chances of that are low. It's a hard name to get a dog to remember, you know.
Yeah.
Arms wide open,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, but God, I'd love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
But anyway, yeah. So again, score this as a is a -1 for Ash.
Oh, I don't think you should be so hard on yourself.
Well, I mean, it sounds similar, but again, it was just I think what it is that this because this happens so much and I do it so often and I do it more in front of other people now than I ever
Sure.
used to do. It always gets a kind of a laugh typically. Like people are like, "Oh yeah, this one." People were like, "What?" And then I was like, "Oh,"
Mhm.
like I think it was the feeling. I'll say it. It was the feeling of failure, and that's all
Oh,
part of
sure.
being a performer. Here's the thing: people think failure is a negative word. It's not. It's all part of it. It's you got to be comfortable with it. It's an integral part of what we do for a living as actors. Um,
Part of the growth.
part of the growth, and you can't fear it. Is the big thing. You can't fear it.
Oh, sure.
Can't fear it. Um, and in some ways, you embrace the fail. Like that's a whole part of the
Sure.
improv world, you know. You gotta, and sometimes when you're really failing on stage, just eating full shits, just shitting in your own hand and eating it.
Yep. Yep.
There's something about it that actually can feel quite freeing because if you can survive that, if you can survive what it feels like for people to actively hate you on stage and think what you're doing is
Mhm.
terrible, there's not a lot that can rattle you. So I think for me, it
Hey,
was just this was my first time with this
sure.
specific kind of failure. And yeah, and you know what?
Yeah.
If I fail again, it probably won't feel as bad.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
and there you go. I'll bet that going into a song lyric, I bet there's a bit of comfort in that for you.
I
And in
think
that
that's what it
point, you
is.
took a step. It wasn't the comfort you were expecting and threw you off.
And my brain went, this is not how this should feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just know that as soon as you said this is, in my head, I went, the story of a girl.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When you just said, just so you know, when you said this is, my brain heard Story of a Girl. So there you
Hey,
go.
that's nice. That's nice.
Folks, I hope you're here for this neurodivergent talk because to be honest with you, it's all we have.
Yeah, look, if nothing else, um, we know what date this releases. We're doing what we can to
Yeah.
mentally survive and give people something to think about and hear and
Yeah.
consume that's not
Yeah.
that. So we're,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
it is election day 2024, the
mhm,
day this comes out.
mhm,
Um a lot going on, a lot riding. I mean, regardless of what side of the spectrum you find yourself on. I mean, it's a big day.
it is.
It's a
It
big
is.
day,
Yeah.
you know. And it's nice to sometimes have distractions from those things.
Yeah.
Which
If
is what I
nothing else, that's what we're here for.
yeah, I think that's what we provide. And I've often thought about, you know, I feel like in general in my career, that's what I, you know, what I like about one of the things I like about it is like providing levity when people need it, you know. And I'm
Oh,
sure there's going
sure.
to be some people that feel fine today. Great, good for you. That's fine. Enjoy it. Enjoy this then. Then it doesn't affect anything. But if there are people who are maybe feeling you know, a little stressed, etc., then
Mhm.
you know, we're here to just try and take your mind off of it, you know?
Yeah.
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 My
With
mind's not off
arms
of it.
wide open.
That's the thing is that I say
Yeah.
that and like it's all I can think about. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
it's we're still a few days away as we're recording this, obviously,
yes.
but it's still all I can think about. And I've been trying not to for quite some time. So you know what? This isn't helping, Lauren. We just said we want to take people's minds off of it. Now I'm talking about it.
Oh, I think we had to at least mention it because I think people would have been like, it's weird they didn't. So we've
That's
mentioned
true.
it half-assedly, so that you know we're in a similar boat
Yeah.
of mental fresh hell. And so we're like, you
Yeah.
know what? Let's think of something else.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
And listen, because this is whether, we record other podcasts record like much further in advance.
Oh, sure.
We record very close always. We may sometimes bank a few, for a couple weeks, but like we're still always recording very close to the release date. So when
Sure.
it comes to like pop culture, world events, holidays, those kinds of things, they're
Yeah.
always, palpable
Yeah.
in what we do.
Oh,
Yeah.
we love a pop culture.
We love a pop culture for
We
sure.
do. We do. If there was a way that we could just only ever talk about pop culture, I mean, God, we'd come alive.
Yeah. Pop culture and cocktails.
Oh, see, there we go.
Yeah.
There we
This
go.
is how it starts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then
Who
people will say
knows?
they miss this, and then all of a sudden we're doing two, and we don't have time
We
to
can't
do
do
two.
two. We can't do two. We can't do two. We
No,
can't do two.
there's not the time. It's
No.
if I can, I was gonna say if I can't handle three costumes, but I did. I broke myself mentally, but I did eventually handle them. But if I can't handle that, I can't handle two podcasts, not two full
Have,
podcasts.
have you seen the videos somebody made? There's an audio on TikTok where it's like they say God gives his strongest soldiers the hardest load or whatever, and then the person's
Sure.
like, I'm not the strongest soldier though. I don't want any more of this. I feel like that's part of it,
Mm.
where it's like just because you can handle it doesn't mean that you need and should handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, let you decide I'm the strongest. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think.
Is there any sort of documentation about the kind of criteria that are required to be determined as described as one of the strongest? Because I'm sure I can poke some holes
Yeah.
in my own credibility.
I don't feel like I applied for it. Like,
Is this what happens
can
when
I
I'm at a
apply for the other way?
yeah? Does this when I signed up for that credit card when I was at that sports arena just to get a free blanket? Is this what I was actually signing
Yeah.
up for?
Yeah. Yeah. 'Cause there's, I mean, I have heard the expression that gives it to the strongest, give it to those who can handle it. And it's like, I wouldn't say I handled it. like,
Yeah. Well, and you
like
know what?
mentally. Oof.
Listen, gosh, we're 17, 18 minutes into this, so it feels appropriate that now I get into psychology talk. I think for me,
Yeah.
what I don't like about it is the implication that it's like that the person's struggles are like, well, if you couldn't handle it, you wouldn't be given it. It's automatically othering the person and telling them that it's like, well, you just have to handle all of these things that you find overwhelming. Because if
Yeah.
you couldn't handle them, you wouldn't be given them. I think that's bullshit. I think
Yes.
oftentimes great people have terrible things happen to them. And I think it's just a
Yeah.
way of like, I think societally, culturally, we like don't like to hear when people share about their honest feelings of overwhelm or any
Sure.
negative emotion. And so people want to try and take it away from you by going like, "Well, it's not that bad." Whereas again, that's why sometimes when I have had people in my life bring things to me that are like, "Oh, this is what happened and it's really awful." My response is, "That is really awful.
Yeah. End
I'm
of
really
sentence.
sorry.
It's
That's
like, that
really awful."
sucks.
It
Yes.
sucks. Nobody needs to hear that it's like, "Well, so and so has it worse."
Oh, yeah.
Or
That's
there's
never
something going
helpful.
on in the world that's worse. Of
No.
course there is. I'm sure that again it's all relative. But I think we just as a people
Oh,
need to
okay.
become more comfortable with people expressing negative emotions. Now, I'm not saying
Yes.
abusive anger or anything like that. I'm talking about people talking about their feeling overwhelmed, feeling put upon, feeling all those things. I think we just need to
Yes.
accept that like those emotions are okay, and it's not that some people just are like whining about being given too much. It's that sometimes it's too much.
100%. I just saw a video within the last few days. It could have been a week ago.
It
I
doesn't matter.
don't know. Um, I love that I can't fully remember the creator's name. I think she's like Nikki Marie. Um, but she had like a corporate job, and then in the pandemic, she started like she did videos, and then she ended up going viral, and now she's just this massive content creator. Um, and a lot of the things she talks about is how difficult certain things can be. Like she's going through a divorce, and she's like, that's really fucking hard. She's a parent to two children. She's like, parenting is so fucking hard, whatever. And there are always comments, which I don't read through their comments, but she will do videos. And this is the one that I saw the other day where she was responding to a comment where someone was like, well, my mother was a single mother who worked multiple jobs and she never complained once. And it's like, but I bet it ate her alive.
Right.
I bet it's like, and there's nothing wrong with being like, say, but we should be able to say, this is hard
Right.
and not have everyone be like, suck it up, baby. It's like, or you could just be like supportive and be like, it is hard.
It's not a contest is the other thing.
Correct.
No one needs to compete that it's like, well, this other thing is worse, or I've had it worse, or I know someone that's had it worse. We all know someone that's probably had something worse than whatever we are currently experiencing in that moment.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it's like that doesn't negate the moment. That doesn't negate the experience or the feelings. Um, yeah. I think it's just, it's I had a therapist tell me at one point, like, your feelings are valid because you feel them, period.
100%.
It's how you choose to handle it, right? So it's
Yeah.
like if your behavior is, well, I'm going to go into a public place and destroy a bunch of property in a store and scream and whatever, that might not be a healthy way of handling it. If it's
Sure.
like, I feel this certain way, so I'm going to go to my partner and attack them and call them a piece of shit and scream at them,
Mm,
that's probably not necessarily the healthiest way to handle it. But again, it doesn't mean that whatever the feeling was that got the person to those places isn't valid. Of course it is.
sure.
Of course it is. But again, that's why I feel like when people are expressing themselves calmly and saying, I feel overwhelmed, this is really hard, this is what I'm going through, I'm like,
Yeah.
what a healthy way of handling it. We don't need to
Yes.
then shut the person down by saying, like, well, you wouldn't have that load if God didn't think you could carry it, couldn't carry it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like,
Yes.
this is not helpful. You're just helping create a villain. That's just a villain origin story at that point.
And all you're doing is making it so that person's never going to want to share anything again. You're making them go, "Oh, I shouldn't share, just shove it back down." And it's like, "No, don't do
Right.
that."
And if you keep pushing your feelings down, if you keep saying, "Oh, my feelings aren't valid, shut up, this is stupid, your feelings don't matter, blah, blah, blah," then you might end up breaking a bunch of things out in a public place, or you might end up
Yes.
screaming at somebody because, again, here's the other thing, feelings, they don't disappear
Correct.
just because you stuff them.
Yeah.
They don't, energy cannot be created nor destroyed.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And if you're putting it out there, if you're talking about it, then the energy is a way to transmute. Yeah, we're 23 minutes in now, so I can use the word transmute. That tracks. But if you're talking about it, there's somewhere for the energy to continue to flow is the point. So it doesn't have
Sure.
to consume you. But if you continue to push it down, it's still there inside of you.
Yeah.
And it will eventually find a way out. Whether it takes a day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years, it'll find
Yeah.
a way out. It has to.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all seen Inside Out, which
Yeah.
I see, which in my brain is a documentary, as opposed to a beautiful duo of films. Um, but I mean, you gotta let that anger out sometimes,
You
and
do.
you're allowed to express whatever feelings in like a safe way for everybody.
Right.
But
Right. Exactly.
it's okay to go, oh, you know what? this is really hard
Yeah.
without people being like, oh, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Mothers in the 70s and 80s could do this without complaining. And it's like,
And how many of those mothers in the 70s and 80s eventually had some sort of breakdown? I'm gonna probably guess close to, if not 100%. Like, of course.
and I just feel like if those parents were honest, they would be like, it would have been nice. It would have been nice to take a little of the load off to say, this is the thing.
Right.
This is, this is the way it is.
100%. 100%. Yeah, I mean, again, that was also a period of time where like therapy wasn't really the thing that it is now. People there was this, in the 70s and 80s, it was very rare, I feel like, for people to be going to therapy. And now
Sure.
it's, I know in some places it still is, but I think that the stigma is lifting, which is great. And again, it's like I just think it's great to be able to say your feelings to a stranger. That's always been something that
Sure.
I found very powerful in therapy, is that it's like, it's one thing to say it to somebody who loves you. So you can say it and you're not going to get judged.
Of
But when you're
course.
sitting with a stranger staring back at you and you're like, well, here we go. There's something that's very powerful about that.
Yeah, I could see it.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I am the person who who thinks Inside Out's a documentary. So,
Right, right. And
you
that would
know,
be something that a therapist may say, let's talk about that some more.
oh, I mean, here's a nugget for your psychologist.
Can't wait.
Every single time I watch Inside Out, or the single time that I've seen the second one, every single time out loud after it's done, I always say, I always wonder who runs my board. Like, because there's always the one that's like the main person who's in control of the board. And then I always ask my husband, like, who do you think runs your board? Whenever I'll say it. After the first movie, I was like, probably sadness of those specific five or whatever it is. I'm like, probably sadness. After seeing the second one, I was like, anxiety runs my board.
Yeah.
Anxiety absolutely runs my board. But I can't let it go. Every single viewing, I'm like, I wonder who, because I'm looking to start the conversation. And he's just like, I don't know. Like, he's like the adult who's like, it's a movie. It's not
Right.
real. And I'm like, movie, documentary, same thing.
My diary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
look, they really hit the nail on the head with that second movie. Did I cry? Did I make it that entire movie? Yes. No tears. The last, like, as it's like ending, I just start weeping and my family is like, what is going on? And I went, there just weren't things like this when I was a kid. And I went.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh, anxiety's always been mucking the controls. I'll say
Well,
that.
I don't even feel like we had a word for anxiety when we were kids. Even when we were teenagers, I feel like it wasn't
Oh
until
no.
adulthood that we even had that terminology. Yeah, listen, if you're a younger listener, am I going to horrify you as I tell you back in our day? Back in our day. But yeah, I mean, it's just the truth. It's just the truth.
If you want to feel old, my 19, almost 20-year-old literally said something the other day and then went, oh, well, back in my day. And I was like, 5 years ago?
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say back in your
Down.
day. What are you
Yeah,
talking
he did
about?
like a back in my day. I was like, get out.
You're still
Just
in
get
your day,
out.
dude. You're
Yeah.
in your day.
Oh, yeah. Living his best life. Yeah.
Oh, God bless it.
Yeah.
God bless it. Yeah, but seriously though, back in our day, again, and that's why
Yeah.
you get to an age, and then
Yeah.
you feel like, oh, you start to see, yeah, that's why when we were at our younger age, people, parents and whatnot were like, well, back in my, it's a constant cycle
Oh, yeah. Oh,
because
yeah.
back in their day, there was, it was harder in many ways, and back in our day,
Yeah.
it was harder, and in 20
Yeah.
years. All you youngins listening, I don't know how many young people I think even listen to this show. Apparently, I think it's a very large demographic, the True Crime Cocktails listeners. I have nothing to
Sure.
post that. I have nothing to base that
Sure.
on. In fact, I should pull the analytics. Um, we have access to this. Anyway, my point is that you'll do it one day. You'll find yourself saying
Sure.
it at some point, and then
Sure.
you'll think back to this conversation, and you'll be like, you know what? my two aunts that I listened to weekly talk about true crime, but also
Yeah.
quantum theory and
Yeah.
psychology and all of
Yeah.
the above, they were right. And I'm not saying I need a attaboy. I'm not saying I need a pat on the back. All I'm saying is, think of me. Think of me fondly. See you never.
Look, if you had asked me the demographics of our listeners,
Yeah.
I mean, I could take some guesses, but I'd probably be wrong. But this does segue nicely. Recently,
Mm-hmm.
my middle child turned to me and went, "Oh, by the way, a friend from school told me she listens to your show." And I went, "My show? Are you being serious? Like just once for like a laugh or like just like genuinely active listener?" And he's like, "Oh, I think she listens." And I was like, "That's interesting." Um and so to that sweet girl I do say, "Hello, Jada. Just giving you a shout out. It's so sweet of you to be here." I don't
I
know if you
love,
should be
well,
age
I
wise,
was going to
but
say,
because I can't curb the crap that comes out of my mouth. But shout out to Jada for listening anyway.
I mean, yeah, listen, how beautiful. How lovely. We cannot endorse people under 18 listening to this show. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, look,
I'm not saying you are. I am just all I'm
I've
trying to do
considered the
is for
shit.
legal
Yeah.
purposes. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I've considered the things that I've said over the years on this show, and there's a reason we're rated the rating that we are.
Yeah. In this time, I pulled up some screen grabs that I had of our analytics,
Of course,
up to date. I don't have the age ones. I don't have the age ones.
of course.
Uh, I love
The
that
fact
that
that you
was
have
the thing.
any,
And you know what? Look, I whether I like it or not, I'm on top of it.
of
Um,
course you are.
well, listen. Before we get into it, what you drinking over there
I'm doing a strawberry lemonade
from Wendy's?
from Wendy's. I
How
did do
about it?
a Wendy's stop because I've already done 7-Eleven today, and I might be getting an ulcer, so I'm just trying to just to chill it out just
Sure.
slightly. So lemonade was my choice. Christy Lynn.
Let's find the most acidic thing to put in there and do that.
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah, the most acidic thing all day. And it's just the hard cola and a strawberry lemonade. And I
beautiful.
worried that it was going to be too like ice rattly, so I've put it in two different cups, and I don't know. It'll be fine.
You're doing great.
Uh,
I just finished a Diet Coke from Burger King because, as you know, I like the
hey,
Impossible Whopper from there. And then I just got my big water, my
of
big
course.
Stanley Steamer, your certified cleaner. There's no need for it.
There's always need for it because I
No.
never know when it's coming, and
And
it's a
listen,
damn delight.
truthfully, neither do I. Um, Listen, we're talking about dead in the water on this episode of the show. Now, I'm not familiar with this story, and you're probably, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. I'm not going to make any assumptions about your life. That's your business. But don't worry, never fear. I've got a synopsis here to get all of us up to speed before Christy Lynn walks us through it. So, Dead in the Water is a documentary on Prime that tells the story of Chris Farmer and Peta Frampton, a pair of childhood sweethearts who take a gap year to travel the world after graduating from university. But 8 months into the trip, the couple stop sending letters home, and their families fear the worst. Sadly, Chris and Peta's bodies would later be discovered off the coast of Central America. So, what happened to Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton? Peta Frampton, excusez-moi.
It's going to happen a lot. Yeah.
Yep. Why did the police immediately trust the suspect over the victims? And will the victims' families ever see justice? Christy Oxborrow investigates.
I want you to know I've been so out of my mind trying to get this done that when you said I've got a synopsis in my head, I went, "Oh God, tell me I wrote a synopsis." I, for a moment, had to flip that paper and I saw words and I went, "That's got to be something."
Oh, yeah. Oh, you did
We'll
great.
get there. We'll get there. Ah,
Also,
okay.
another
Yeah.
symptom of dissociation, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, oh God. Halloween is just 12, 11 months away.
Yeah.
I can't think about it.
No, not now.
So disclaimer, as we do, and then this is what takes it from the ha-has to the oh.
Yeah.
So this episode will contain mentions of suicide, rape, and child abuse, so trigger warning for those who need it. Chris Farmer was born May 20th, 1953. He was the middle of three children born to Charles and Audrey Farmer. Peta Frampton was born July 31st, 1953. She was one of five children born to John and Sammy Frampton. And yes, I'm going to say it now because I know someone's already thinking it. There was a famous singer in the 70s named Peter Frampton, who is most known for the hits Show Me the Way and Baby I Love Your Way, which was covered by the band Big Mountain in the 90s. I don't know much else about Peter Frampton besides the fact that he performed at Homer Palooza on an episode in the 7th season of The Simpsons. There was also something about an inflatable pig, but I don't fully remember, and it is far too early in this episode for me to get distracted. My point is, if you're a fan of Peter Frampton, this episode might get confusing.
Sure.
So Chris and Peta grew up across the street from each other in Chilton, Greater Manchester, England. When they were 14, they started dating and they remained a couple for the next 10 years. They both attended the University of Birmingham, where Chris studied medicine and Peta studied law. After graduation, the couple decided that they wanted to travel the world. They traveled throughout Europe, and by December 1977, they were in Australia. They ended up heading to Los Angeles. They made their way down to Mexico in the spring of 1978. Throughout their travels, Chris and Peta kept in constant contact with their families. Peta sent long letters to her mother, while Chris sent cassette tapes describing their trip to his parents. In a letter posted May 19th, 1978, Peta said they had reached Guadalajara, Mexico, and were planning to make their way to Belize. The next plan was to take a bus to Merida in the Yucatan Peninsula, but then in Peta's next letter, she said, change of plans. They met an American man named Dwayne in Belize City, and he offered to take them to Guatemala on his 32-foot boat, the Justin B. And while we're all automatically thinking about Justin Bieber, given the time frame, Biebs didn't even exist yet. The boat was actually named after one of Dwayne's sons. So Dwayne offers to let Chris and Peta travel with him on his boat down the coast. And since Chris wanted some sailing experience, they decided to take Dwayne up on his offer. When Chris and Peta got to the dock, they discovered that Dwayne had two sons with him, 13-year-old Vince and 11-year-old Russell. The group left Belize on June 26th and sailed down the coast towards Guatemala. Throughout the trip, Chris's Polaroid camera was used to take multiple photos, including one of Chris on the Justin B, which is just one of multiple things I will post on the case file, on Instagram and Facebook at True Crime and Cocktails, and on Twitter at Not Detectives. In a letter dated June 29th, Peta told her mother outright that she disliked being around Dwayne's children. Yeah. She said that they acted so much younger than their ages and they just bickered all the time. She also mentioned that Dwayne was constantly putting the children down and verbally berating them. It was said that when Dwayne was drinking, which he often did on the boat, it turned into a Jekyll and Hyde situation. His son Vince described it as, quote, like a storm that would come in.
Oh, dear.
Which isn't great when you're all stuck in one small space. So they are on board for several days. There's no privacy. They kind of felt like they were all on top of each other. I'm assuming that tensions were probably running high. According to Peta's letter, in early July, they stopped on a small island near Belize called Hunting Cay, where they were invited to a multi-day party by a lighthouse keeper, which is not something you hear every day but absolutely makes sense for 1978. The kids on the boat said PETA was very anxious to spend some time on land because it had been just day after day after day of seeing nothing but water, and she just needed a change. As PETA wrote in her letter home, quote, "Nothing much happens on a boat." PETA then wrote that once they arrived in Guatemala, she was going to catch a flight to New Orleans and Chris was going to head to Trinidad. It was never publicly stated why they would be going separate places, but that specific letter was postmarked in Guatemala on July 18th, 1978. But after that, the letters stopped coming. PETA and Chris's families were concerned for the couple's safety because Guatemala was in the middle of a civil war at the time. There were also major issues with drugs and gangs, not to mention the fact that most of that area was covered in vast jungle. So it's possible Chris and PETA could have been lost or kidnapped or even fell ill and were stuck in some sort of hospital somewhere. Chris's father, Charles, who was a former reporter for the BBC, contacted the police. He wrote letters to every American consulate along the coast of Central America. He contacted the harbor master in Belize to learn as much information as he could about the Justin Bee. And keep in mind, this was pre internet. So Charles even went so far as to write letters to various weather stations in Central America to see if maybe the Justin Bee had possibly been caught in a storm. Charles Farmer was integral to getting worldwide media coverage on the case, but months went by without a word. Investigators conducted multiple searches of the area but found no sign of Chris and PETA. When David Sachs, a detective with the Greater Manchester Police Department, was first given the case, there just wasn't a lot he could do. The couple went missing thousands of miles away. So he's like, well, what do you expect me to do? Well, Charles Farmer then was like, oh, do you want some help? So he gave David Sachs all the information that Charles had personally compiled, including that port record from the harbor master in Belize. Just say this, the documentary uh gave like the feeling of like, well, the police were in the UK and the couple went missing in Central America. What were they supposed to do? And to that I say, Charles was also in the UK and he managed to fucking rock it out and get information while in the UK.
Right.
So I'm like, it was doable.
There was phones.
Yeah.
This is 1978. There is phones.
Yeah. So it's just wild to me that they were like, oh, yeah, what were the police going to do? I'm like, the police shouldn't be shouldn't be waiting for a family to go, here's the information we found for you.
No.
I mean, kudos to Charles for compiling all of that information
Yeah, for
and
real.
writing like so many letters. And I mean, I can't even imagine. But so the investigator looks at that port record from the harbor master and he notices that the Justin Bee left Belize on June 26th and arrived in Livingston, Guatemala on July 6th. The record listed Dwayne Boston as the captain, with Chris, PETA, and Dwayne's two sons as the crew. But when the boat arrived in Guatemala, Chris and PETA were no longer on board. So the next obvious step in the investigation is to speak to Dwayne and see what he has to say about Chris and PETA. But investigators learned that Dwayne left Livingston July 19th, sold the boat to an American, and then just returned to his hometown of Sacramento, California.
So, just some wildly suspicious behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. Police couldn't track Wayne down until October 1978, which was 17 weeks after Chris and PETA had first gone missing. Dwayne told investigators that he dropped Chris and PETA off across the bay from Livingston on Punta de Manabique, which is a largely uninhabited peninsula. He claimed that the boat needed repairs, so he couldn't go much further than he did. Dwayne said Chris and PETA were deadbeats who were, quote, heavy into pot. Since that area of Central America was a major drug smuggling route at the time, police just took Dwayne at his word and started to consider that maybe Chris and Peta had been drug smugglers. And
What?
then they discover, well, the couple had recently been in Morocco, which is another popular drug smuggling route. So the DEA opened a file on Chris and Peta.
My God.
Lead officer on the case, David Sachs, said that, well, with this new information, it's possible Chris and Peta maybe were arrested by local police or killed by other drug dealers. Again, we're just immediately taking the word of a random dude here. He says this young couple were heavily into drugs, and the next move is to suggest, well, obviously they were selling or smuggling it. I get that in an investigation, no stone should be unturned, but this felt like such a wild leap. Two people in their early 20s using drugs in the 70s doesn't seem that suspicious to me.
No.
Yeah. Also, just curious, did the police talk to the victims' families to learn about the couple? Because it feels like we're just taking Dwayne's word for it. A guy who barely knew them. Why were the police so quick to trust Dwayne? Especially when he left the country shortly after Chris and Peta went missing. Chris's father, Charles, outright, I bless this man for how bold he was. He asked to interview Dwayne's two young sons. Because he's like, they're going to know something. But the police said, absolutely not, never going to happen. So Charles, being the reporter that he was, gets the home phone number for Dwayne's parents in Sacramento, and he spoke to Dwayne's father, Russell Sr. Russell claimed he didn't know where Dwayne was living at the time, but he said that Dwayne had mentioned that Chris and Peta were really into drugs. So then Russell said, quote, "Have you ever looked into Colombia?" Mm,
What?
yeah. So again, just so much negativity and assumptions made about Chris and Peta, all based on Dwayne's opinion. Then in January 1979, 6 months after Chris and Peta went missing, a private investigator contacted the family to say that Chris and Peta's bodies had been found. Apparently, the bodies had actually been found in July 1978, but since they had no identification, the bodies were buried in unmarked graves. Now
What?
that they believed that these previously unidentified people could be Chris and Peta, the bodies were exhumed in April 1979, and the couple were officially identified through dental records.
Oh my God.
Peta Frampton was described as beautiful, quiet, zen, and interesting. She was just 24 at the time of her death. Chris Farmer was described as energetic and dedicated with an adventurous spirit and a great love of music. He was just 25. Chris's sister Penny said that the couple was clever, talented, and had so much to offer. According to the FBI report, volunteer firefighters, or bomberos, discovered the bodies around 3:30 p.m. on July 8th, about 200 yards off the coast of Guatemala near Punta de Manabic. Now, heads up, this is a bit graphic. According to the autopsy report, the bodies were found bobbing near the surface of the water, tied to large machine parts. The only reason the bodies were found was because the ropes that attached them to the parts were too long to keep them far underneath the water.
Right.
Chris had been hogtied. Peta's hands were tied behind her back and her ankles were tied together. The autopsy described, quote, obvious signs of torture. Chris had a fractured skull and a wound to his right leg, and Peta had a plastic bag tied over her head.
Oof.
The official cause of death was drowning. It was believed the couple were in the water for at least a week before their bodies were found. Since Chris and Peta were tied up and thrown into the ocean with weights attached to their bodies, it's obvious they were murdered. And since they were put in the water in the middle of nowhere, it's obvious they came from a boat. And what's the last boat we knew that they were on board? The Justin B. So maybe investigators shouldn't have been so quick to assume Dwayne was telling the truth.
Yeah.
So we're going to look closer at Dwayne. Silas Dwayne Boston, known as Dwayne, was born in 1941 in California. His father, Russell Boston, had a criminal history as he allegedly ran illegal booze during Prohibition, which also apparently involved killing anyone who got in his way, like snitches and federal agents.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. Russell Jr. also claims that his grandfather was a convicted criminal who once escaped jail by beating a guard. Russell Jr., who was named after his grandfather, claimed that Russell Sr. was responsible for multiple murders and that his preferred method was poison.
Wow.
Unfortunately, no names were given, so I couldn't properly fact check that. But according to Russell Jr., Dwayne felt that poisoning was, quote, the coward's way to off someone.
The fact that he even has an opinion.
Yeah, yeah. But we're going to get into Dwayne's dark side in a moment. According to his children, Dwayne was a prolific burglar who would bring his kids along on various break and enters, expecting the children to participate. And
Oh,
if the children refused, Dwayne would berate them and call them pussies and say they don't have what it takes and you're no son of mine and all that kind of bullshit. Dwayne was also said to be a big party guy who seemed to live his life as though he didn't have any responsibilities, keeping in mind he was a parent. The kids said that there were always random people at their house, just smoking pot and doing other various drugs, just openly in front of these children. The family moved around a lot. They never stayed in a place for more than a year at a time. Dwayne had a lot of girlfriends, and he was married at least 7 times.
wow.
Messy marriage, side note. Now, if you're a regular listener of this show, you know that the thing that drives me the most insane is not being able to find specific information. Even if that information seems irrelevant, if I have a question, I am enraged when I can't find an answer. Multiple sources have stated that Dwayne was married 7 times. I could not find records for each of them. Why do I need them? I don't. I just was interested in seeing the timeline because I just assume some of those marriages overlapped. I know for a fact he married Mary Lou Venn in 1963 and that she filed for divorce 4 or 5 years later. And then Dwayne married Linda Vogue in August 1971 before divorcing her in July 1974. But in January 1974, 6 months before that divorce, Dwayne married Kathy Quinn. And for those asking, how is that legal? It's not. But also, to attempt to work around it, Dwayne listed his name as Dwayne S. Boston on the marriage license instead of the factual S. Dwayne Boston that he would have been. So I guess he found a loophole, which also still illegal, but yet the most benign illegal thing that Dwayne would do. So I guess we let it go. Speaking of which, while still on the topic of Dwayne's marriages, his third wife, Mary Lou, went missing under mysterious circumstances, and it
Of
was suspected
course.
that Dwayne was responsible.
Yeah.
Mary Lou Venn was born December 1944. She was 17 when she ran away from home to be with Dwayne, who was almost 22 and 2 marriages deep by that point.
Wow.
Mary Lou and Dwayne were married 2 years later in February 1963. The couple had 3 children, a daughter, Vicky, followed by sons, Vince and Russell. According to the family, after Mary Lou and Dwayne got married, he started doing drugs. He became abusive. A few years later, Mary Lou filed for divorce and was seeking custody of the couple's children when she disappeared. Mary Lou was last seen September 1st, 1968. Dwayne never reported her missing. In fact, Mary Lou's teenage brother, Jeffrey, was the only person to make an official report. When police interviewed Dwayne, he said Mary Lou emptied their bank account and ran off with some radio DJ boyfriend and just absolutely abandoned her children. The police, who didn't know Mary Lou at all, said, yeah, that sounds about right. And then just didn't look into her disappearance. In fact, the police went so far as to tell Mary Lou's family that Mary Lou was, quote, a no good floozy who abandoned her children for a random man. Her brother Jeffrey never believed that, and he said he truly believed Dwayne was responsible. Sadly, 11 years later, Jeffrey took his own life. He was just 26
Oh
at the
boy.
time. Mary Lou Boston was just 23 at the time of her disappearance. As of this record, she has never been found.
Oof.
According to the couple's children, Dwayne told them he took Mary Lou to an orchard where he told her to run before shooting her in the back. Dwayne said that Mary Lou was still alive, so he walked over to her. She said, "What about the kids?" And he shot her 2 more times point blank.
Wowzer.
Dwayne then allegedly buried Mary Lou in a shallow grave in or near a creek bed, is as much as he's ever told them. Dwayne then allegedly went home and told his kids, if anybody asks, tell them she ran off and left you. According to Russell Jr., every year on Mary Lou's birthday, Dwayne would get incredibly drunk and sit and just listen to Mary Lou's favorite music and tell the children how their mother's death was his fault. He then said that Mary Lou's death was the only murder that he regretted.
Jesus.
Yeah. An unnamed man who once traveled with Dwayne said that Dwayne bragged about killing Mary Lou, saying he shot her in the back before shooting her again as she begged for her life, which is horrific for just anybody, but for your wife? Oy. During their time together, Dwayne also bragged about killing 2 tourists in Belize, 3 drug dealers in Sacramento, and being responsible for a hit and run death in Sacramento in 1972. Now, was Dwayne just making up these lies for some sort of street cred, or was he absolutely responsible for the deaths of multiple people? Well, according to his son, Russell Jr., Dwayne was, quote, a cold and calculated killer. In an article that Russell wrote for the website Medium, Russell claimed that his father was, quote, not a Dahmer or Bundy type killer, even though he murdered many more people than both combined.
Wow.
As a quick true crime refresher, serial killers Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy were believed to be responsible for the deaths of 47 people combined. So, I mean, if what Russell Jr. is saying is true, Dwayne Boston possibly murdered 50 or more people. I'm not saying that what Russell believes is not true, but those numbers just almost feel impossible, especially for Dwayne to get away with it as long as possible. But then again, to be like, oh, those 2 kids who went missing, druggies. And the cops were like, understood. And then my wife left me for another man. Can you believe it? Ah, the whore.
Yeah.
Like, get fucked. Oh, I'm so angry about this. I just, the police could have helped in so many of these moments.
Oh yeah.
But, so Russell Jr. claims that when Dwayne was just 8 years old, he committed his first murder by killing a man without housing. No specific details were given. So again, I couldn't look into it. But an 8-year-old being able to overpower an adult man feels unlikely. I, of course, don't know the circumstances or how hands-on that murder supposedly was, so I can't say for sure. But according to Russell, whenever Dwayne got into trouble with the law, he would simply pack up the kids and go on the run. Some specific things that I wanted to point out from Russell's article about his childhood, and I'm paraphrasing here, but quote, my father was a deranged fugitive who pulled us from school and forced us to hide out in the mountains, the desert, or foreign countries for months or even years. It's how I learned to live off the land, how to fish, find water, build shelters, forage for edible plants, cook, make fire. Ignore the cold, ignore the pain of hunger, sail and navigate by the stars. I knew Dad only kept us around to do all the chores. I knew this because that's what he told us. I didn't mind. When I was busy, he was less likely to find fault, criticize, or even beat me. He also said having us with him helped avoid suspicion, especially when smuggling drugs across borders, passing through checkpoints, or any other time he needed to seem less suspicious. Russell also explained that his father was physically and verbally abusive towards him and his brother. When Russell was 7, Dwayne burned down their house for the insurance money while the children were still inside
Ooh.
and they had to get themselves out. Russell said that Dwayne told them he was going to get them out. He was just waiting until the last minute to save them because that looked better on the insurance claim.
How would it look better that you waited till the last minute to save your children?
It makes it sound like he would look like a hero.
Gross.
But also, it's like, were you really? I don't think you were. But I think we can all agree that Dwayne seems like a bad dude. We don't even have any evidence of these crimes, so we can't determine exactly what Dwayne did or didn't do. But since it is the main topic of this episode, I think we should focus on the deaths of Chris Farmer and Peta Frampton. And since Dwayne and his sons were the last known people to see the couple alive, we're going to look at their version of events. In late 1977, Dwayne packed up Vince and Russell Jr. and told them they were going to Belize. I don't know where his daughter Vicky was at that point, but at various times throughout their childhoods, Dwayne would send his children to live with either their aunt or their grandparents, and then he'd just fuck off because he was hiding from,
I
police.
literally just wrote down, where's Vicky? So that came in at like the exact
Well,
moment.
and here's the thing I'm going to say about that, which is not written in my notes, but the documentary was like, well, he had these 2 kids. And then everywhere else is like, well, there was 3 because there was also the son that he named the boat after, who was not part of this.
Oh, right.
And then it was like, well, his daughter Vicky. I'm like, where's the daughter coming from? And so I had to go further and further. And yeah, there is a daughter, but she's barely mentioned anywhere.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I have a feeling it was just he has probably issues with women and was like, I'll take the boys.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised. So Dwayne gets passports for the boys, and the 3 of them drive from Sacramento through Mexico all the way to Belize, which is a 3,300-mile road trip. And according to Google Maps, it would take about 56 hours.
Oof.
Since the kids moved around a lot, this trip just seemed on brand for their dad. They thought nothing of it. What they didn't seem to realize at the time was the reason they went so far away was because Dwayne was running away from a statutory rape charge.
My God.
Yeah. Turns out that Dwayne met a woman at a bar and took her home. He later learned the girl was not even 18. Dwayne claimed the sex was consensual, and the only issue was her age, as he was 37 at the time. But nothing screams innocent like fleeing the country. Dwayne told his sons that they needed to, quote, let things cool down in the States for a
Oh,
while.
boy.
Once they were in Belize, Dwayne's father joined them in April 1978 and bought Dwayne a boat, which Dwayne named after his youngest son, Justin, who is back in California with his mother, Kathy. I find it fascinating that he named the boat after the youngest son. He could have just as easily called it the Vince Russell or something to make the 2 children who were with him, feel included. It's also possible it was some sort of power move or he was just a dick. Who knows? So Dwayne gets this boat. And yes, he had previous sailing experience and he did spend several years in the Navy. So him owning a boat isn't completely out of the realm. It wasn't just some random guy who was like, I've never had a boat. I have a boat now. So with this new boat, Dwayne started making money by giving illegal boat tours to tourists. He sailed them to and from the islands along the coast of Belize and into the Caribbean. According to Dwayne's son Vince, things seemed to be going well with Chris and PETA on board. They made a stop on the island of Hunting Cay where they stayed to participate in a massive party. Vince said his father was drinking, having a great time. A few days later, Dwayne, his kids, and Chris and PETA got back on the Justin B. But Dwayne kept the party going and just kept drinking. Drinks that he had his children make for him, by the way.
Oh,
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah. Um, and then soon that like happy-go-lucky party guy persona changed into an angry, vengeful man. As Vince described it, quote, there is no satisfying him when he's like that. According to Vince, Dwayne just randomly starts yelling at Russell, demanding that he make him some rice. And then he grabbed Russell and started yelling at him and shaking him. And PETA and Chris told Dwayne to stop, which of course upset Dwayne. He gives them the classic, like, don't tell me how to raise my kids. And then Dwayne goes and takes a huge swing at Chris, but missed and ended up in the water. Chris laughed and said something along the lines of, like, maybe that'll cool you off, before helping Dwayne back onto the boat. But Vince said Dwayne was humiliated and immediately told his kids, well, now we have to get rid of them. The next
Wow.
day, Dwayne said he was going to drop the couple off in Livingston, Guatemala, but that he didn't have the right visa to get himself into the country, so they'd have to wait until nightfall to dock the boat. They put the anchor down and waited out in the middle of the water. Hours later, Dwayne told Chris to raise the anchor, and while Chris had his back turned, Dwayne walked up behind him and started beating him with a billy club. Dwayne allegedly hit Chris so many times that the club actually broke. So then he stabbed Chris in the leg with a fillet knife.
Jesus.
PETA was down in the galley at the time of the attack, and when Dwayne saw her, he threatened to shoot her with a spear gun if she moved. Dwayne then hogtied Chris's hands and feet behind his back and went down into the galley with PETA, where they remained for over an hour. We aren't going to think about what potentially occurred.
Ugh.
When Dwayne came out, PETA was naked, with her hands tied behind her back and her ankles tied together. Dwayne then brought up a large gear and tied it to the rope that was attached to Chris. He got a second gear and tied it to the rope that was attached to PETA. Dwayne then put a plastic bag over PETA's head, claiming he didn't want her to see where they were. And despite repeatedly telling the couple he was going to let them go, Dwayne tossed the gears overboard one at a time and then rolled Chris and PETA off the deck. After they were in the water for a few minutes, Dwayne just calmly said, they're dead now.
Jesus.
According to Vince, Dwayne said, quote, you know, I had to do that. They didn't give me a choice. He then threatened to harm his own children if they told anyone about what happened before they just, docked the boat in Guatemala. Now, that was one child. According to the other child, Russell Jr., Dwayne changed the location from the initial agreement he had made with Chris and PETA, which meant that Dwayne wanted more money from them than he had originally asked for this trip. Dwayne then attacked Chris, but Chris is younger than him and probably in better shape, so Dwayne lost the fight. But by this point, Chris and PETA absolutely won off the boat. So Russell Jr. says that Chris and PETA agreed to be tied up and blindfolded so that Dwayne could lead them off the boat because he didn't want them to see what direction they sailed away in, which, why would that matter? But Dwayne promised to drop them off in shallow water so they could walk back to the beach. However, Dwayne tied large gears to the ropes without Chris or PETA knowing, then pushed them into the water far enough from the coast that you couldn't see the bottom. Russell added that Dwayne threatened to kill his sons if they, quote, snitched. So the two kids have conflicting stories. They were just 13 and 11 at the time, but they both gave the detail that the couple were tied to large gears from the boat and that their father had threatened them to stay silent. According to Vince and Russell, once they got to Livingston, Guatemala, Dwayne gave Chris and Peta's clothing away and then mailed Peta's letter.
Gross.
Which is also, I assume he thought that would give him extra time before people would come looking for them. But it's like, but that's the letter that names you, names the boat, names where you were going. It's like, why would you have done that?
Yeah.
But shortly after Chris and Peta's deaths, Dwayne took a German couple out on his boat where he allegedly took them to an island, robbed them, and slit their throats.
Jesus.
The Bostons then went back to Guatemala, sold the boat, and returned to Sacramento. While staying with his paternal grandmother soon after, Vince told her what happened with Chris and Peta, and she told him not to talk about things like that because if the police found out, he'd be an orphan. This grandmother, specifically Mary Sellers, was also the same person who outright told Vince and Russell that their father had killed their mother because she wanted a divorce.
Jesus.
We're just going to keep covering for him, I guess. In 1979, Dwayne was arrested for abducting his 4-year-old son, Justin, whom he shared with his fifth wife, Kathy. When he was interviewed by police, they mentioned Chris and Peta, and Dwayne said, "Oh, now I know why you guys are making such a big deal about this," as though abducting your child
My God.
isn't a big deal to begin with. Dwayne claimed he met Chris and Peta at a hotel in Belize, and he agreed to take them on his boat. He said they were deadbeats. He said Peta consumed so much alcohol, and Chris was just constantly injecting himself with drugs.
Okay.
Which is kind of similar to what he said before, but I love that before it was they're constantly smoking pot, and now it's, well, she's drunk all the time, and he's injecting himself now. So now he's chosen to go a step further for how horrific these kids supposedly were. So, oh, where are we? There we go. But then Dwayne changed his story from the first story, because before he said he dropped them off across the bay. But now he's saying, well, they were invited onto another boat by 2 locals who were sailing nearby. He said he couldn't remember details about the boat. He couldn't remember the exact date when they got on this other boat. But he was pretty sure he saw them in Livingston on July 16th. But we know that Chris and Peta's bodies were discovered on July 8th, so there's no way that he could have seen them on July 16th. Also worth noting is that Peta's last letter was postmarked from Guatemala on July 18th, 10 days after her body was found. So we know she absolutely did not mail that letter, so I'm more likely to believe that the kid was right.
Yeah.
And the dad did mail it. When investigators outright asked Dwayne if he killed Chris and Peta, he said, quote, "I told you the last time I thought I saw them was in Livingston on July 16th. It's interesting he remembers the exact date he last saw them, but it's also interesting he didn't outright say no.
Right.
And while the police believed that Dwayne was guilty of the murders, at this point they had no legal right to detain him, and he was free to go. In their early 20s, both Vince and Russell Jr. separately contacted the FBI, Interpol, the Sacramento Police Department, and Scotland Yard to explain that their father had killed 2 people in the Caribbean in the late 70s. However, no matter how many times either of them called, the authorities dismissed it as an unbelievable story. Both boys contacted the authorities multiple times over the years, but they were never taken seriously. Then they were told, well, this never happened because there's not even a record of Chris or Peta in any of their systems. And for those who may question, why the hell wasn't there a record of Chris and Peta even though their bodies were found and they were clearly murdered. Um, that's because, according to investigators, Chris and Peta's case was officially closed in 1981 after the Greater Manchester Police Department decided that there wasn't enough evidence to charge anyone. They also the files of the case from Interpol just went missing.
Oh, like what? I mean, again, it's like if there's a bingo you could play listening to this show, it's like at what point in the episode are we going to talk about how files went missing? I feel like it happens just so
All the
often.
time. All the time.
Feels like, again, if that's the case, maybe, I don't know, find a better system.
100%. Um, they also neglected to tell either of the families that they had closed the case.
Oh, wonderful.
Everything the Greater Manchester Police had on Chris and Peta's case, they said they sent to the Sacramento Police Department because the prime suspect was an American. So to them, well, it's an American case now. But Sacramento says, well, we never received a file. In January 1999, a Sacramento detective working on the now cold case contacted Greater Manchester PD to ask permission to interview Vince and Russell Boston. Since they didn't receive that original file, they believed the case still belonged to Greater Manchester and they didn't want to step on any toes. Unfortunately, Greater Manchester never responded. And before we start to blame Greater Manchester for dropping the ball, soon after, Chris's father, Charles, emailed the Sacramento Police Department to try and renew interest in the case, but they never responded to him. So, really, every police department attached to this case failed Chris and Peta.
Jesus.
And Chris's family continued to push for answers even after the passing of Charles Farmer in 2013. Chris's sister Penny picked up the torch, and in October 2015, she got the sudden idea to search for Dwayne and his sons on Facebook. This was the moment in the documentary where Penny admitted she had an anonymous Facebook account, which she only created to keep an eye on her teenagers. No shade to Penny because she is one of the heroes of this story, but I found it hilarious that she openly admitted. It's almost like she was embarrassed that she had Facebook, and it was like, well, the only reason I have it is because it's a secret account that I use to spy on my children.
And listen, Penny, we feel you, okay?
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people listening to
Yeah.
this show right now are like, I probably have at least one burner account on some platform.
I actually don't.
Oh, that makes
I'm
one of
too
us.
Oh, I'm too scared to go against rules, and I think I'm also just I was like, I can't be bothered. I should have started one like years ago when I first started it, but
Listen, I can give you the login for mine if you ever want it. We can share it.
there she is. Love of my life.
Yeah.
So not only did Penny find Dwayne, the man that the police have said for decades they can't locate, she finds Dwayne on Facebook and learns that he's living in a convalescent home in California. She also found Vince, Russell, and Dwayne's fifth wife, Kathy. She sent the boys a message to ask if they had been on the boat that day her brother was murdered. And while she didn't get a response, Penny wasn't going to let that be the end of it. So she reached out to the Greater Manchester Police and told them she found the Boston family on Facebook. But of course, by then the police had no record of Chris and Peta's case. But Chris's mother, Audrey, happened to remember that David Sachs was the original lead investigator back in 1978. So then the police contact the now retired David Sachs, mention the case, and he goes, "Oh, yeah, I made full copies of that file. It's in my shed. Would you like it?"
Thanks. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, this would have been great years ago.
Yeah, but the idea that they never considered, look, I'm sure it's a massive police department and there are people retiring all the time, but it's like you didn't want to look at who might have been lead detective in 1978 and maybe give them a call, give them a bit of a ring, see what they're up to, see if they have thoughts. I don't know.
Yeah, Jesus.
Ah, But the great news is this means that all of the information that had been lost was now found, and they could use it to try and actually solve the case. And while this is amazing, again, it should not take a victim's family doing all the work to get a case solved. But within weeks of Penny's Facebook discovery, Sacramento police officially interviewed Vince and Russell for the first time. And 14 months later, on December 1st, 2016, police went to the convalescent home in Paradise, California, where they arrested Dwayne Boston on 2 counts of first-degree maritime murder because it involved deaths which occurred in the ocean.
Right.
38 years after the deaths of Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton, their alleged killer was finally going to be put on trial. And I'll warn you, I know it's too late now, but if you're going through if after you hear this, you're like, I'm gonna go check out that case file, his mugshot is a horror show.
Oh,
He is a terrifying gentleman.
okay.
So you're not gonna get a warning when you're scrolling through it.
No, this is your
You're
warning now.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, if you scroll prior to hearing this, you're gonna go, "Bah," and drop your phone. I pretty much guarantee.
Jump scare.
And I don't feel bad about saying that about that man.
No.
So the FBI, who headed the investigation at this point, attempted to locate the graves of Chris and PETA because they wanted to use DNA to officially determine their identity because they knew the defense might try and be like, oh, well, it's not really them. How do you know for sure? Because we're just basing it on dental records from the 70s and who knows. So the defense was pretty much preparing to rip apart the witness statements from Vince and Russell, saying they were just children at the time of the murders. They might not have fully realized what they were witnessing, not to mention their memories might not have held up over the last 38 years. There was concern that Vince and Russell's version of events were different, like how Vince said Chris was beaten before being pushed overboard, and Russell claimed that Chris and PETA willingly got in the water. Based on the autopsy report, the wounds on Chris's body fit what Vince said happened. But both boys described the large gears that Dwayne allegedly used to weigh the bodies down and the idea that Dwayne just heartlessly let the couple drown. So I think the truth of what happened is somewhere between the two kids' versions. Honestly, I personally think Vince's version is more likely to be true, and that Russell's brain maybe tried to protect him from what he was seeing, so he remembers it being more peaceful than it truly was. But I'm not the expert. Thing is, regardless as to which version the court was going to believe, the prosecution needed the bodies so they could do DNA testing to prove beyond a doubt that the bodies did belong to Chris and PETA. When the bodies were originally exhumed, dental records were used, but we're sparing any doubt. So the prosecution got DNA samples from the Farmer and Frampton families, and the FBI agents were sent to Guatemala to find the graves. But they found nothing. An American pastor named Gary McClure visited the gravesite in 1984 and took photos. He sent photos to the family. He gave them like a description on how to find the graves. But by the time the FBI arrived, the cemetery had grown, it was overcrowded, and it was just not organized in any specific way. So it was nearly impossible to find anything. So they were like, wow, shit, we couldn't find anything. Ugh. Well, we tried. And that was kind of it. But Chris's sister Penny, again, relying on the family, visited the cemetery in December 2018. She found the graves after searching for an hour.
Come on.
So it was kind of suggested that maybe the FBI did not go to the cemetery at all. Because it was chaotic and it was difficult to find, but if the FBI would have had the same information to find it that Penny had, and she found it.
Right.
So either way. But even without the bodies, thanks to PETA's last letter and that port record, we know that PETA and Chris were on the Justin B with Dwayne and his sons. We also know that 5 people left Belize on June 26th, and only 3 of them arrived in Guatemala July 6th. And thanks to Vince, we know that Chris's mixtapes were found on the Justin B, which were still in Dwayne's belongings. All these years later, they were given to the police. So if Chris and PETA really got on another boat, as Dwayne had once suggested, why would Chris leave his music behind? That doesn't make any sense. While the prosecution built their case, Dwayne Boston's health declined rapidly, and he was admitted to a hospital where he exercised his right to refuse medical treatment. He also just stopped eating because the coward wasn't interested in seeing justice get served. And Dwayne Boston died April 24th, 2017, at the age of 75. So sadly, the Farmer and Frampton families will never have justice in this case. And if Dwayne was in fact responsible for the disappearance of his third wife, Mary Lou, her family is also never going to see justice. And how many other crimes did Dwayne Boston get away with? Well, according to his son Russell, after Chris and PETA were murdered, the Bostons returned to Guatemala where they picked up a German couple. Dwayne offered to take them to a nearby island, but when they got there, he allegedly robbed them, slit their throats, and just left their bodies on the island. The FBI looked into it, and they said, well, that never happened because no German couple was reported missing in the area. And to that I say, for decades, you claimed that Chris and PETA didn't exist either because there was no report on them. So who knows? So if you can't find anything on this alleged German couple, to me, that doesn't mean they didn't exist or it didn't happen because it probably did. But you guys were just shitty record keepers.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is also possible the couple didn't exist, but it's possible they did exist and just were never reported missing.
Right.
Or the police lost the files on them as well. According to Russell Boston, his father confided in him that he had killed 33 people in his life, although Russell believes that number is higher. Russell also claimed he made a deal with his father later in life that if Dwayne ever felt the urge to kill, he should reach out to Russell, who would attempt to talk him out of it by giving Dwayne all the money he had in his possession at the time. Russell said, quote, over the course of several years, I was sure I stopped multiple murders, which convinced me to dig myself deeper and deeper into debt, maxing out my credit cards and emptying my bank accounts. At one point, a cold case detective in Sacramento believed that Dwayne might be the Golden State Killer, who committed 13 murders and 50 rapes in the 70s and 80s. They even made Dwayne take a DNA test, which came back negative. The real suspect, of course, Joseph D'Angelo, was eventually caught, and in 2019, he pled guilty and was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional life sentence, and then another 8 years. So at this point, there is no physical proof that Dwayne committed any crime that he was ever accused of, with exception to the charges that are on his criminal record, which include carrying a concealed firearm, rape, and assault. So without any proof, how can we be so sure that Dwayne was involved in the deaths of Chris and PETA? All we really have to go on are the witness statements from the two kids and the fact that the boat left with Chris and PETA aboard and returned without them. But a box of paper was discovered at the home of Dwayne's mother, Mary Sellers. Inside that box, there were like multiple documents, photos, that kind of thing. But then there were some handwritten notes, which were determined to be Mary's handwriting. Some of the notes, it seemed like she was just dictating things that Dwayne said to her on the phone. And in all of those notes, the only tourists that ever were mentioned were Chris and PETA and a German couple that Dwayne claims was on board the Justin B during a storm. But during his time owning a boat, he took dozens of tourists on trips, but none of them ever got mentioned in these notes. Only those two couples. So why, out of dozens of people, Would Mary only write notes about those two people? Well, according to the BBC podcast Paradise, it seems Mary was taking notes so she could coach Vince on what to say if the police interviewed him. Because at the time of this phone call, which took place weeks after they returned to California, Vince was living with his grandmother while Dwayne had gone off living under the radar because he just potentially killed 4 people. And so he's on the run again. Because nothing says innocent like going into hiding and then coaching a witness as to what they should say. But again, the only people mentioned during these calls were Chris and Peta and a German couple whose names were never given. And I know this is all circumstantial. I just truly believe that Dwayne was responsible for the deaths of Chris and Peta and possibly this second European couple. All his other potential crimes aside, if Dwayne was in fact responsible for Chris and Peta's deaths, he's an absolute monster. To torture 2 people, tie them up, and then throw them into the ocean to leave them to drown is such a horrific way to die. And for what? Because Dwayne's ego got bruised? What an absolute piece of shit. It is disgusting to think that this monster was out in the world for decades, free to commit countless other crimes. If you're interested in more information on the case, you can check out Dead in the Water, a book written by Chris Farmer's sister Penny, which was the inspiration for the Amazon documentary. And then there is the 12-episode BBC podcast Paradise, which I mentioned. It interviews several family members and investigators involved in the case. I only listened to a part of one episode because it was the only place anywhere talking about those papers written by Mary Sellers. And I was like, I absolutely need information on that. But I mean, if you're looking for more, there you go. But speaking of podcasts, reporting for this podcast, that was a terrible segue, but I'm Christy Oxborrow.
I loved that segue.
Yeah, thank you.
Listen, I have so much I want to talk about. So let's hit the can, grab a drink. We'll be right back with more on the Dead in the Water episode of True Crime and Cocktails. All right. We're back on 3. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're, of course, discussing the documentary Dead in the Water. I got a lot of things to say here.
Yeah.
What a wild story and truly so terrifying. The idea, again, that you could be murdered and essentially just fall through the cracks for multiple decades. I mean, I know we hear versions of that a lot on this show, but this one, I don't know, it chilled me to my core. There, I said it.
Yeah, I get that.
Now, right away, when you said they met an American man named Dwayne who offered to let them ride on his boat, all I wrote down was, don't get on a floating murder capsule, please, my God. Now, that's not me victim shaming at all. It's more just that I, of course, immediately knew exactly what was going to happen. And I just think that moving forward for other people, it's like, learn from this. Learn from this. Even if the person seems reputable, don't get on the boat.
Oh, you can, like, I can't imagine what it was like 40 years ago, but now you can hardly trust.
Oh, yes.
So
and
many
back
people.
then, especially, like, I'm not judging them for their choice whatsoever. I'm sure back then it felt very safe. Again, this was a simpler time.
Yeah.
But I'm saying now, 2024 and forward, folks, again, I'm speaking to the young people that I don't know whether they listen to this show or not, but I'm just letting them know, again, don't take the risk. It's never worth it.
Yeah.
A party that was hosted by a lighthouse keeper. Again, the things that not on my bingo card, but here we are.
Yeah.
Okay. The fact, again, that he seemingly immediately sold the boat, but then we know he likely committed another murder, or we believe it's possible he committed another murder before selling the boat. This person is diabolical. I mean,
yeah.
Every detail of this guy, I'm so fascinated by, because the fact that he's involving 2 of his children in all of it is so twisted and awful, and my heart breaks for those 2 because I feel like they were completely failed, obviously, by this man for their entire lives. And even the grandmother that's like, don't tell the police. It's like, yes, they lost their mother. Like, there's so many layers to these, again, living victims, like he's not just potentially the murderer of some people, but also, you know, the way he treated those children, my God. Um, Now, I have to say, so Charles, who is Chris's father, of course, asked to interview Dwayne's sons, asked to interview Vince and
Yes.
Russell, and the police said no. So then he called Dwayne's parents, and that's when I wrote down, and it's interesting to me that this ended up coming back later, and I never saw it coming, but I wrote down, this is just like Facebook now. What do I mean by that? I'm going to tell you. Again, am I tipping my hand a little? Sure. But all I'm saying is that if there's a chance that there's someone that you know that you're trying to find in some way and you can't find anything about them, my number one tip as an online sleuth
Yes.
is to find the page of the parents. And you know why? If you can find the page of the parents, 9 times out of 10, they don't have privacy settings, so you're gonna be able to find photographs and information that you would not be able to find potentially on the person's page that you're looking for. Now, this is, of course, are you looking for someone to see if they actually have a secret partner? Those kinds of things. Again, I'm only
Oh,
talking
sure.
about using these powers for good,
Of
which
course. And
if
not
there's
like
someone.
reaching out to these people,
No,
just
no, no, no,
browse the friends.
no. But again, it's like that's can be a weak place is the people's parents. And yes, I only look, I never touch at these elderly people's profiles is what I mean. Um, oh my God. So what next? This is just, I mean, in fact, the fact he was married at least 7 times. The story about Mary Lou is also absolutely horrifying.
Yeah.
And not only am I speaking about her, what I believe was her murder. I absolutely believe that he killed her.
Oh,
But it's of course the police also going like, yeah, sounds like something a floozy would do, run off with someone. And here's my point, because we've heard this so many times on this show, that
mm,
especially back in the day, not our day, not in our day, but back in the day, they would if a woman was killed by her husband, he would say, "Oh, she ran off with someone," and the police would go, "Oh, okay, I'll stand down," because of course they're going to believe the man because patriarchy. Uh,
yep.
but in this example, here's my thing. He said, "Well, she drained our bank account and ran off with a boyfriend." Can you just check the bank account? Can you
Mm,
just do one thing to try and corroborate his story? Can you just
yeah.
see? Can we prove that she physically took all that money out herself? Because if they had done that and then they gave up, I wouldn't respect it, but I'd at least say they tried something.
Sure.
They didn't just take his word. That's the thing. Whenever you hear these stories about the police, and this is a great one because it happens multiple times, just taking someone's word for something without doing anything to try and find a secondary source of proof, it makes my blood boil. When we
Yeah.
do this show, we make sure that we corroborate, we fact check. Like there's an obligation you have as a police officer to not just blindly believe somebody. And we hear it again and again and again when we do this show, and it makes me crazy. And I think part of the reason it makes me crazy is that it's terrifying to me. It's very
It's,
scary to me that someone can just say, "Oh, this is the truth," and then law enforcement believes them.
it was said that he was incredibly charismatic.
They
And
always are.
so I'm like, there it is. That's
And if
all it
anything,
took.
right. But if anything, if the person seems totally normal and charismatic, that should be the alarm bell.
Yeah.
That should be an alarm bell. Like, now listen, maybe not as much then, but now knowing everything we know about narcissists and psychopaths and how they work and the fact that again, like Ted Bundy, great example, wildly charismatic, like this should be a red flag.
Yes.
My God. Um all right, the fact he was then bragging later about killing 2 tourists near Belize. Uh-huh. His son saying not a Dahmer or a Bundy, but murdered more than both of them combined. Again, it is so chilling that I feel like we've never heard of this person, and I understand the reason we probably haven't is because there was no evidence in these cases, which is heartbreaking. But just such a trail of destruction, my God. Also describing their father as a deranged fugitive, my word. But it makes sense. He knew that if he was traveling with children, he wasn't going to be as much of a sore thumb. He
Yeah.
wasn't going to, it was going to allow him to seem less suspicious when running drugs and whatnot. Then I wrote down, where's Vicky? Then you said, I don't know where Vicky was. That was great. The timing was just impeccable. Um, now here's the thing.
Yeah.
Listening to the two different accounts, Vince and Russell. Also, quick aside, Russell Jr. So, but Dwayne wasn't named Russell.
Correct.
So the grandfather was Russell, and then they decided to skip a generation and call him Russell Jr.
Correct.
That's the weirdest thing I've ever heard.
I I I want to believe that it was for the sake of differentiating between the two Russells. But I am also like, well, it just also makes sense that the dad would be a narcissist too.
Well,
So
I guess I just Russell the second would make sense to me, and then just call him Russ or something. But
sure.
Russell Jr., for the first bit of it, I was like, I think she said that was his son, but it must be his brother because the grandfather would have been named Russell. Anyway, I
Nope,
figured it out as you were talking.
they
It
skipped
threw
it.
me. It really threw me. Okay. I'm gonna psychologist hat here for a second
Oh,
and
yes.
get into the differing stories that Vince and Russell have. And they've held on to these stories into adulthood, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay. So, and Vince was older?
Yes, because Vince was 13
Mhm.
in 1978, and then Russell was 11.
Uh-huh.
And Vince was in the documentary, which just came out earlier this year, giving this exact same timeline of events.
Mhm.
Russell was not in the documentary, but he wrote an article that came out within the last year or two,
Okay.
giving those versions.
Here's my personal opinion, and I'm not an expert and I'm not trained, and I am not in any way, don't quote me. This is just speculation because that's what we do on the show.
Of course.
Um, the detail that Vince gets into, I don't think you can make up. The fact that he was older at the time, I feel like he's the older brother. He and his brother have been subjected to this madman of a father who's been dragging them around the world, taking them on these long trips. They've been describing him again as deranged. They've talked about how he's taken them out of school, that they knew that they were being used to make him look less suspicious. They knew he was a criminal. You know, at this point, also, I feel like he had told them that he had killed people and whatnot. Like, we know there was some amount that was communicated to them about their mother and her death slash disappearance. I think that I could, and maybe there's psychology behind this and maybe there isn't, but I could wrap my head around that older sibling being forced to grow up very quickly because he probably wanted to take care of his younger sibling when they were living in chaos with this madman of a father.
Sure.
And so to me, I could see that causing him to grow up quickly without him having any choice in the matter. And the fact that he matter of factly described the details of all of this, the beating, the stabbing, etc., the fact that we know that the bodies had obvious signs of torture, that was stated by medical professionals, right?
Yeah.
The fact that we knew there was the bag over her head, etc., that we know that they were tied to the gears, and that was the piece of the two of them that was the same. I I just tend to believe his story. And
Mm.
that's not me saying anything negative about Russell, but what I will say was, as the younger of the two, where potentially I'm wildly speculating, but again, one would think that it would be possible that Vince would be trying to protect him, etc. It's possible that he was told that as a part of this,
Mm.
either by Vince or Dwayne or both. Like, it's possible that he was told, well, we have to do this to get them off the boat or whatever, like to try and save him from it.
Sure.
We don't know where they were, how much of this they were like, where were they in the boat while all this was happening? It sounds to me like they were that Vince was likely present.
Oh,
Russell
yeah.
may or may not have been, right? And
True.
and again, to the point you made, the brain does amazing things, especially when you're a child. It does amazing things to try and protect you from what you're actually seeing. And if he
Yeah.
was actually witnessing the murder of these two people, I could completely see his little brain going, we're not going to let you process that. So we're going to show you a different, we're going to skew this memory,
Sure.
right? Because there was also, as far as I know, there was nothing mentioned about them being blindfolded or Chris being blindfolded. We knew that PETA had the bag over her head, but there was
Right.
nothing specific about that. And we also know that if Chris was hogtied and PETA had her wrists and her ankles tied, then unfortunately they would not have been able to be walking while tied up like that. So that's
Correct.
again fact. That's evidence that when their bodies were found, that was how they were found. So that does not match up with Russell's story, but it
Right.
does match up with Vince's story.
It does.
And so I just really tend to believe in this case that older brother, unfortunately, I believe him. I think that that's likely how it went. Pretty close to that. Everything that he said aligns with information that we and evidence that we pulled later. And I do think, and again, this isn't me trying to be condescending at all, but I just think that it's more than possible that Russell's brain committed something else to memory or gave him a memory that was easier for his brain to digest at the time, into adulthood. Like again, like I I buy that completely. I think again
Yeah.
these children were wildly abused for an
Oh, yeah.
extended period of time. There could be other memories that he has that maybe are, you know, different variations on what was actually happening in the time. They talk about how when children witness extreme violence, extreme abuse, that can be often the times of a dissociative identity disorder, DID, which is something we used to call multiple personality disorder. We know that it's much more nuanced than that now. But the psyche can split, and it can take you, there can be kind of two realities that can be created in that moment. And it's ironic that I brought up dissociating earlier because that's literally what it is. It's taking
Sure.
you, your brain taking that child somewhere else in those moments where they don't
Sure.
have to fully absorb what is happening, because what they're
Right.
seeing is so violent and awful and overwhelming that their brains just truly can't handle it. And that can be the source of, again, childhood trauma is the source of, well, listen, so many things, so many disorders. But I just really tend to believe that 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 seems the most plausible to me, given both of those statements from those two. And again, a tragedy on every level, to the victims, to those kids, to all of it. My God. Uh, the next tragedy is the fact that as adults, they both reached out to the authorities. They
Yeah.
wanted to tell their story and say, this is what happened. This man is bad. And they were always discredited. And that must have been devastating for the both of them. And I
Yes.
worry about the mental health of well, everyone, but certainly about them, like being gaslit like that as adults when you know that your father did this. Because
Yeah.
again, I choose to believe their story. I don't feel
Oh,
like they
yeah.
would have any reason to make it up. And we also know, with the little evidence we do have, that they were murdered. It does align with again, certainly with Vince's story. I tend to believe who no one else has a motive or access to them at that time.
Sure.
To your point, PETA's letter corroborates that she was on the boat with them at that time period. I, again, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, this guy did it. Like, there's no way around it. The fact that, to your point, Penny, one of the real heroes in this story, the fact that 38 years later there was an arrest, God bless her, good for her. I agree with you. Shouldn't have to be the families doing the work, but um, listen, I'm floored and impressed that she just never gave up. Good for her.
Right.
Uh, yeah. One question I have in regards to them trying to locate these graves, why were the bodies not sent home?
Great question.
I don't know whether that's a listen, I've never thought about it until this moment. I guess that would probably be a massive expense. So I can
Sure.
completely understand that families may not have the money to do what a heartbreaking situation. Um, but that was the first thing that just popped into my head when it was like, oh, they wanted to exhume the bodies, but then they couldn't find the graves. And then of course, Penny found them very easily. I can't. Uh, but that was the one thing that just struck me was it was interesting because I feel like so often on this show in true crime, we hear about so and so, someone's murdered somewhere, and then the body is sent home. Like that's quite a
Sure.
common situation. Now, this was a different period of time, and again, I have no idea what that is or means in terms of cost to a family or not. I guess there's just a part of me, and you're gonna love this naivete. I was like, I guess I just thought that would be a government service. I don't know why,
Oh,
but I'd never
sure.
thought about it until this moment. And I was like, also, how sad that it was like, not only did that not happen, no fault to the families, can't stress that enough. But then this idea that they get brushed off when they finally have made this arrest almost 40 years later for the murder
Mhm.
of their loved ones. The fact then that it's like, it's more than possible, to your point, that nobody may have even gone and looked. The fact that Penny was able to find them in an hour, yeah, and that it was difficult, but it was like she found them.
She
That
did.
to me is like, what are we talking about here, guys? Like, that's not great.
Well, and especially when Penny went, it was her and one other person.
Right.
I don't know how many people the FBI sent to go look,
Right.
but it's like, again, they had the exact same instructions that Penny had,
Right.
but Penny had a bigger drive to get it
Of
done
course.
because for her, she's like, I want this to happen. For them, they're like, if it does,
I also think it's shitty that it was like, we need DNA proof. Like, I understand that the dental records thing, whatever, but I'm like, have dental records been ever proven fallible? Like, not as far as I've heard. They still use dental records to identify bodies. Like, I understand that we have DNA now and it's like, whatever, but like, to me, it's like, do you really need the DNA to get a conviction? I understand why the lawyers wanted to. I get that, but I just find that really fascinating that it was like, you did identify the bodies. It was interesting. It's interesting to me.
mhm,
Now regarding this German couple that Russell, excuse me, that Dwayne potentially also murdered. The fact that it was like, well, no German couple was reported in that missing in that area. Here's what I want to say to that. Maybe they were Dutch. Maybe they were from somewhere else in Europe.
right
Maybe they
call.
spoke German. They were like of German descent, but they weren't from that place. Like, there's, to me, it's just so offensive that it's like, well, this elusive German couple, no German couples were reported missing. Were any couples reported missing? Anyone? Did you find
Yeah,
any bodies? Because I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, if we're relying on the narration of an 11 and 13-year-old who are
sure.
saying they were German and a deranged psychopath killer potentially saying they were German, I mean, again, it's like there's just so much nuance where it's like, oh, so because there was no one that was listed as absolutely being German at that time, well, that didn't happen. It's like, how? How on earth? I mean, even the fact that Chris and Peta, their bodies were found, and then they were like, "Oh well, let's bury them in a unmarked grave." Like, what? How is it like? Even
Yeah.
if there was no connection being made at the time because they hadn't been properly reported missing, etc. Like, it just feels to me like, isn't it a phone call for a police department from anywhere to call the police department in the cities where these people would have been last seen and say, hey, FYI, there's a couple missing. If any couple you happen to find bodies, just give us a ring. Like, that's one phone call.
Yeah. Oh, for me, it's like, okay, I understand. I mean, I don't really understand, but I get you find the bodies and you go, well, we don't know what to do. We're going to bury them, unmarked grave. And then, like, weeks later, suddenly people are like, we're looking for this young couple. And no one went, well, we did just bury two unknown people. Like, there was
Yeah.
nothing like that. It was just an immediate, like, oh, we didn't know. It took a private investigator to get involved to be like, oh, hey, that, and I don't even know how they found out if it was like this unmarked thing and they're like, tell me more about this. When did that happen? Or did they look through records or whatever? I don't know. But it's like, did police not look through records? Did the police in the UK who were looking into it, did they not? contact like whoever would have buried the bodies and been like, "Do you have any bodies lately?" Like,
Yeah,
really?
it just feels like, again, like, and now, we have technology where obviously sharing information is probably easier, but I just feel, again, yeah, like, it just feels like such a simple conversation, even if it was like, "Hey, would you mind calling us if you find any bodies?" And what it got away from them. I don't know. It could be that police department following up a couple times. But to me, the idea that it's like, "Oh, well, we didn't know, and so we buried them, and then when you were asking, we never made the connection." That just feels like a real blind spot. That feels like a real that's the stuff that chills me to my core. That's what haunts me at night when I'm trying to fall asleep. You know what I mean? Is that it's like
Yeah.
administrative failure. I think that
Ah!
it really freaks me
Yeah.
out. And again, because of that administrative failure, because that for some reason they weren't able to have those clear lines of communication about this, that's what makes me say, well, this quote unquote German couple, again, look, I'm going to say it. Is it possible that they thought they were German and they were actually Dutch, for example? I think that that's absolutely possible. I'm not suggesting that the Dutch and the Germans are at all alike. I'm not suggesting that the accents or the language sounds alike. But all I'm saying is that it's like, I wouldn't necessarily assume that it's like, well, if we don't find anyone specifically German, then uh-oh. I would say anybody's.
Yeah.
Anybody's. Let's just anybody's.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Let's just assume that anybody's that were found in a certain amount of time in that certain kind of area. Let's maybe just cross reference. Let's just cross reference some dental records back then, you know? Feels like that's the least we can kind of try and do here. Um Again, it's crazy making. Uh Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about very quickly, psychologist hat on.
Yeah.
The other thing that broke my heart and also ultimately makes me believe now, excuse me. I want to make sure that I'm talking about the right child. It was Russell who said that he would have his dad call him anytime he had the urge to murder.
Yes.
This makes me feel again like, first of all, that is so sad. And it's so sad that a child, and I knew he was an adult when he did it, but the child trauma, the child inside of him felt like, I have to stop this person from doing this again, which is not his job at all.
Yeah. Oh,
That is
100%.
breaks my heart. To me, that proves to me even more as a non-licensed expert who's talking out of her own ass. That proves to me even more that he was wildly impacted by this psychologically. How could they not be? But it makes me believe even more that it's possible he recounted his brain remembers that night a little bit differently. The fact that he has this deep urge as an adult that it's like, anytime you want to kill, call me and I'll just give you every cent that I have. And then he put himself wildly into debt, desperately trying to stop his father from murdering again.
Yeah.
That's I don't have the time nor the knowledge to delve into how deep that goes. You know what I mean? But that to me is even more of a sign that I think that this is a deeper, not that I'm suggesting that Vince isn't also deeply impacted, but it just feels like it's manifested in a way that I feel like aligns with perhaps this different memory of things. Because
Sure.
if he felt in that moment what he was witnessing, that he was powerless to stop it, which he was an 11-year-old child. Both those children were powerless. But if he felt that powerless at the time and felt guilty or shameful or all of the things that our brains do that then would
Yeah.
make your brain go, that's not the way it happened. I could see that person, that same
Sure.
person in adulthood going like, I'm an adult now. I have an ability. I have to stop this. It's my responsibility to stop this because I couldn't stop this before.
Yeah.
Um, and that is so tragic. And again, this man not only took lives but ruined, took his son's lives too, in my opinion. Like
Oh,
robbed
yeah.
them of any chance of being, of having a healthy life. I mean, it's so tragic that those two boys were brought through all of this. And again, meant in my opinion, as not an expert who's even seen hasn't even seen the documentary, but like the mental anguish that would have put those kids through is disgusting.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And who's to say? I mean, I'm not convinced that Dwayne killed 50 plus people, but who's to say he didn't just scam his own kid and go, all I have to
Absolutely.
do is tell him I'm thinking of killing somebody and he'll give me whatever money I need.
Of course.
Because of course he just has to use people, the piece of shit.
Oh, I mean, this man is I mean, look, we don't have time to get out the psychopath chart of traits, but yeah, no, I don't for a second think that he wouldn't do that. And I think also, him telling his son that he killed 33 people, etc., that may or may not be true. I mean, it could be,
Yeah.
but it also may not be. But to your point, it's also a manipulation. It's a way to control. It's a way to, um, even into adulthood, try and make this child who's now a man fear you, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the idea that he would then say, like, well, anytime you're feeling one of those urges, call me and I'll just give you all my money. I mean, again, to me, I think it just breaks my heart because I feel like I hear that in the voice of that child, that it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
please let me help. Please let me stop this. Don't do it. Please don't do it. I'll do anything. Um,
Right.
which again is absolutely not his responsibility. But I also understand that at that point, I believe they had also tried to go to the authorities.
Yep.
So I'm sure there's a part of him that also felt like, well, what else am I supposed to do? I've tried to get him, you know, in trouble
Yeah.
with the law for this. No one believes me. My grandmother has coached me for years about how to, coached me and my brother for years about how we can't turn him in. We tried it anyway. We got turned down. I'm sure at that point he also felt like, well, what other choice do I have than to not try and take it into my own hands and stop him? I mean, again,
Right.
it's just hard. I find that really heartbreaking. It's affected me very deeply for some reason.
Of course.
Um, and again, not to say that I'm in any way saying that's as bad as the deaths of Chris and Peta. I'm not at all, but it's just another piece in the trail of destruction that he left behind.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I also realized I'd given the people a warning about his mug shot. And then I was like, the best warning I could give them is your reaction. Now I'm going to show you a younger photo of him first.
Okay.
And they're the two. I'm going to show you the younger photo, and then I'm going to show you the
Great.
mugshot. They're both the photos that are posted in the case file.
Okay.
But this was him like the 80s.
Oh, okay. Not at all what I was picturing, but got it. Okay. Yep. Looks very 80s, 1980s. Sweet Jesus, Lord in heaven. Wow. Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Oh, that man's a demon.
yeah. That's
Look at his eyes.
oh yeah. I try not to, but yeah,
Don't for too long. I'm glance at them. Don't stare at them. He wants to eat
yeah.
your soul.
Oh yeah.
Oh my
There's
God. That
it's
literally made my stomach turn.
oh yeah. There's the second you see him, you're like, that man killed so many people. I bet it. I bet he did.
Oh, absolutely. It's like how I talk about Richard Ramirez that I believe he was absolutely a demon, like possessed by a demon or
Of
was a
course.
demon. That man too.
Yep.
100%. You don't age, no one ages like that.
No.
That's fucking, oh my God. I'm gonna have to like really cleanse the palate before bed tonight because that is, oh,
Yeah.
that man is a demon. Oh my God.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
No, you're not wrong. Dear listeners, brace. Just brace yourselves before you take a look. Brace.
And they'll, but it's so funny that the case file will already be posted
That's
prior to
true.
this. But I only do that because I just don't have. I know that I won't be awake to post it
Of
when
course.
when the episode comes out. So that's why I started doing it the day before instead of doing it the
Yeah,
morning
so then
of.
it's available when people wake up and listen to the episode right away. I get that.
Yeah,
Listen, for anyone who doesn't look at it ahead of time, you're being warned, and for those who did, we're sorry, but like that's
we got surprised as well.
we got. So
Yeah,
we're in the same boat with yous. Um my God. Wow, wow, wow. It is
yeah.
rare. Like I feel like there's times where there's some people that you see that then they look, they may look a certain way or whatever, but no, that man's killed. That man's killed. You can
Oh, 100%.
yeah.
Yep.
Christy Oxborrow, fantastic work as always. Truly a riveting episode. 15 out of 10. Could not have loved it more.
It's an honor.
The honor's mine. The honor's
Oh,
mine.
well.
And we thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this chaotic, wild journey. If you haven't already, give us a follow on the socials on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at True Crime and Cocktails, on Twitter at Not Detectives. If you'd like some bonus content, go over to patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails. I also want to reiterate, if you're already a patron, nothing's going to change for you. You don't have to worry about your monthly fees changing. It's just if you're new to sign up, go to the website to do it. Don't do it on the app. Save yourself the cash out of the pockets of overlords. And of course, the only place for official True Crime and Cocktails merch is, of course, truecrewmerch.com. So check that out as well if you're interested. Christy, do you want to tell the people about next week's episode?
On the next True Crime and Cocktails, Mary K. Ross.
This was our October patrons poll winner. Now, what was the category? What was the category?
A case from the 90s.
A case from the 90s, and it's going to be Mary K. Ross. Well, listen, I'm very excited to learn everything there is to know about that. Christy, do you want to say goodnight to the people?
Eh, good night, Wendy's. I love your lemonade.
Good night, Shadow.